we are in Psalm 89. And we went to great lengths at the beginning of Psalm 89 to explain how God explain his character, and then explain how Jesus manifests all those same characteristics. And we said that the reason why that was important for the psalm to express again and again and again for the first 18 verses is the idea that the power of God is then transferred to us through the king. So talking about the Davidic king and this idea that the people of God are empowered through the king with the power of God. And so that's the first 18 verses, if you will, of the psalm. The second section of this psalm is verses 19 to 37. And basically the psalmist is just unpacking the Davidic covenant in more detail. So if you go read 2 Samuel chapter 7, it's pretty much the exact same. He's quoting a lot of stuff from there. He's not really changing it at all. He's just expressing it maybe a little different way. It's almost identical to what you see in 2 Samuel chapter 7. What we've already kind of talked about is the blessing that comes along with the Davidic kingdom. We've talked about the blessing when people follow the law of God. We've talked about how that gets worked out through the Davidic king and how no one satisfied that Davidic king until Jesus came along and then offered us as believers this sort of power that we would never know otherwise besides through Jesus, besides through this Davidic king. I want to talk about a different aspect of the covenant. So we're not going to read most of 19 through 37. We're only going to read 3 verses. And since we've talked a whole lot about the good part of the covenant, we're going to talk about what if the people of God don't follow his laws? What if they don't follow his commandments? Because there's also stipulations in the covenant for what if they don't? What will happen then? Now, here's the connection to us before we start. If we, the people of God, receive the power of God through the king, and this covenant applies to us through Jesus, then this warning that he's about to give the people of God for what happens if they don't follow his commandments is equally as applicable to us. Okay, so that's how I'm getting to us. Here's the question it should raise in your mind. This is a question that many non-Christians wrestle with and can't figure out. This is a question that when non-Christians pose this to Christians, they often are scratching their head going, I'm not really sure how that works. The question is this, and it'll become more clear when we read it in the text. How is it that God can punish believers in this life if Jesus took all of our punishment on the sin, on the cross? How is it that God's justified in punishing us for our sin now if Christ took everything on the cross, or does he not? I've heard Christians say that God doesn't punish Christians, ever. Doesn't matter what you do with your life. If you're in Christ, then there's no way God can punish you because Jesus took all that on the cross. And this is a hang-up for non-believers. They're sitting there going, I don't want to follow a God who's unjust. He's punishing people twice. Why punish people on earth and then punish Jesus as well? This is nuanced. You have to read carefully. You have to read very carefully. You also have to have an answer to this question for your own belief. You need to have an answer to this question for unbelievers when they come asking if God is really just or not, or if he punishes twice. So we're going to read verses, starting at verse 30 in Psalm 89, and we're just going to read to 33. We're going to read to 32. This is the second half of the covenant that God makes with David about the people of God. It says this, starting in verse 30. If his children forsake my law and do not walk according to my rules, if they violate my statutes and do not keep my commandments, I will punish their transgressions with the rod and their iniquity with stripes. Okay, stop reading there because we'll get to the next few verses in a couple weeks. But I want to sit here for a second. Some people want to explain this verse away. They don't like the word rod. In some translations, it's translated club. It's literally the idea of like a beating. Okay, what leaves stripes on a person's body when you hit them with it? A whip. Okay, so this is talking about a club, okay, a big stick, and a whip. These are not nice terms. Some people want to explain away a club or a rod because in other verses in the Bible, that word is translated as a shepherd's staff. And they were like, oh, this isn't really punishment from God. This is more like guidance from a shepherd's staff. No, Hebrew parallelism puts these words together. Okay, so in verse 32, here's how Hebrew parallelism works. Transgression is paralleled with iniquity, the first two nouns. And the rod is paralleled with stripes. It's the means by which it's carried out. So when you parallel a rod with stripes, which is clearly a whip and can't be translated any other way, is not a shepherd's staff. This is not God graciously bringing his sheep back into his fold. This is God chasing people around with a big stick going, you cannot do that anymore. Okay, so just so you know, you can't change these words around. They're very harsh. Now, some people don't like real technical discussions. If you want to answer this question accurately, it's going to get a little technical. So, some of you may have heard the word semantics. This answer to this question is about semantics. What it means is the meaning of words. And some people are like, okay, this is too deep already. Pay attention because it's important. The meaning of words changes over time. Words have multiple meaning. Okay, this happens in every language. It happens in English. It happened in Hebrew. It happens in Greek. This is why there's some confusion about certain words in the Bible and what they exactly mean, because certain words have a range of meaning. We call it a semantic range. Here's the idea in English. If I looked at a Smurf and said, that guy's blue, I could be meaning he's literally blue in color, or I could be meaning he's down. He's a depressed Smurf. Okay, range of meaning. A simple word like blue in English. Same thing's happening here in the Hebrew. Okay, this word, punishment, has a range of meanings. And the question is, what does it mean here? And this is what hangs people up, because we have an Old Testament written in Hebrew and a New Testament written in Greek, and the Greek nuances this for us, but the Hebrew doesn't. And so people get confused. They think that all punishment is the same, and it's not. Okay, so that's what we have here, and we'll unpack it a little bit for you a little bit more. I want to suggest to you on the front end that there is a difference between punishment, as in legal judgment, okay, and discipline for corrective action. Okay, punishment, you are guilty. Discipline for correction has nothing to do with guilt, has nothing to do with legal declaration, has everything to do with you cannot afford to continue to make the same mistake. So I'm going to make the punishment severe so that you don't make the same mistake again. These are not the same thing. But in the Old Testament, this is punishment, also punishment. There's no discrepancy really in the Old Testament between these two things. The word gets used for both. But people look at this and they say, how is God justified in that? So let's walk through it a little bit more. I want you to go to Hebrews chapter 12. This is going to give you that nuancing that I was talking about. And then I'll give you an illustration so that if you're not tracking with me, it'll become a little more clear, hopefully. Hebrews chapter 12, you want to start in verse 4. It says this, "In your struggling against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him." The Greek has all kinds of different terms for this. The Hebrew doesn't. "The Lord disciplines the ones he loves, chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom the Father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which you have participated, then you are illegitimate children, not sons." And then he goes on talking about earthly fathers and how if an earthly father punishes, how much more effective is the punishment of God. The New Testament clears this up for us a little bit, this idea of punishment over here, which is legal, and punishment over here, which is for discipline. It's multiple aspects of God dealing with sin. Okay, so here's what you need to know. This over here is what Jesus died for. This over here is what you and I could never do. This over here is what we had no power to change. This over here is why you need Jesus. This over here is why every single one of us was dead in our sin, because God, the judge, said, "You're guilty, and I'm guilty." And he also said, "I can fix that." Okay, this over here, as we live as followers of Jesus and still screw up from time to time, this is the punishment of God for correction, so that you and I don't continue to make the same mistakes. Okay, big churchy words. This is justification, so that you are declared righteous, justified before the judge. Sanctification. Two completely different things. Don't mix these two things up. Here's why. I'll give you an illustration so you can follow a little better. Say, husband and wife, they have a kid. And the kid decides he doesn't have enough money to buy this video game that he really wants, so he steals it. Mom and dad find out, and they're like, "What should we do?" And they're like, "Whatever it is, it needs to be severe. He can't be continuing doing this." Small town. So they decide to call up the sheriff and say, "We need you to come search our house, and we need you to find this. We know he stole it. We need you to cuff him up, take him down to the courthouse. We're going to call Judge Brown, and we're going to tell him he needs to make a sentence of some sort." So the sheriff comes, and he's like, "I need to search your house," finds a video game, and he's like, "Sorry, we're going to have to take you," and the kid's freaking out. And takes him down to the courtroom and puts him before the judge, and the judge says, "You're guilty. We found the game," all this stuff. Judge says, "Here's what you got to do to make right the wrong. You got to give the game back. You got to do 100 hours of community service in that man's store to make up for what you stole. If he asks you to scrub his grout with a toothbrush, you're going to do it for 100 hours because you cannot steal from people." The judgment is so that what was wrong can be made right. So justice happens from the kid to the store owner. Okay, The parents go to the courthouse with him. They see the judgment. The kid's freaking out. They're like, yes, this is working. They take the kid home. And they say, not only are you going to give the game back, we're going to make sure you do every hour of that 100 hours. Oh, and by the way, for the next 6 months, no Xbox for you. Corrective action. This is discipline. This is completely different than what the judge declared over here. Has nothing to do with you're guilty, we got to make the wrong right. Has everything to do with parents saying to the child, you cannot make this mistake again. It's not just about making right the wrong. You got to know that you cannot make this mistake again, and we're going to make sure you don't. This is very different than that. Okay, Psalm 89, when he says, I will punish their transgressions with a rod and their iniquity with the stripes, he's sitting over here saying to the people of God, I will not allow you to continue to make the same mistakes again and again and again. Got nothing to do with Jesus. We couldn't do anything about that. Jesus did all that for us. This was the judgment of God to us saying, you're guilty. I can fix that for you if you choose to believe in me. We don't get out of this. This we sit in as believers. This we have to account for in this life. This is a possibility, this sort of discipline, for not living according to the law of God, for not following the statutes of God, for not living like him. Okay. What God's doing, as I said before, is he's taking on multiple aspects of the sin problem. God's our judge, right? He's the standard for right and wrong. When Jesus died on a cross, took our punishment for us so that he could satisfy the judgment of God. You may also know that in the New Testament, God's also described as our Father. So God is simply sitting in both roles saying, I will punish how I need to punish here, that's Jesus, and I will discipline how I need to discipline here. If you haven't figured out yet, this is a warning to everybody here. You are not off the hook because Jesus died for your sins. If you continue to live in continual disobedience, areas of your life that you can't figure out or you don't want to figure out, there is a moment where God may say, punishment's coming because I'm done. I'm done having my children disobey me, and I'm not willing to let them continue. I need to make the punishment severe. And some of you, the next question may be, how does that happen? How does God do that? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. It's probably going to be different for everyone. If you have kids, some of you may have figured out that your kids have hot buttons. They have things that they like more than other things. They have things that will make more of an impact on them if you take them or discipline them a certain way than other kids. I experienced this a little bit when I coached soccer last fall. I had some kids on the team, and I told them this up front. I said, if we have discipline issues as a team, the punishment will not be the same for every kid. Meaning it's not going to be like, if you do this, you got to run 10 laps. I said, because some of you will run 10 laps with joy, and you'll be skipping across the field like, I love running, and other of you, it'll be the worst punishment on the planet. I said, for some of you, going to every single one of your teammates and apologizing and saying, I'm sorry for doing this, I won't do it again, and having to do that one-on-one, face-to-face is completely terrifying for some of you, and I'll figure that out, and I'll make you do it. Because everybody has a hot button, something that's going to be more effective than something else. Unfortunately, God knows your and my hot buttons. So what's the punishment for us, you and I, living in continual disobedience to God? I don't know. But you can be for absolute sure that God knows whatever that is for you. And I hope that's convicting. I hope that's scary. He knows, and he's a loving Father, and he won't hesitate to affect your health, won't hesitate to affect your family, which is the one for me that really gets me. When we were in Austria in 2012, 2013, I remember having some things that were going on in my life that I was just being disobedient about. I didn't want to change. I knew they were a problem. And then I was sitting in service one day, and our missionary team was having some trouble as well. And one day I was sitting in service reading through my Bible, and God said to me, if you don't want the people around you to be affected by your sin, you need to clean up. Because he knew that more than I cared about changing whatever it was in my life that he was asking me to change, I didn't want other people to suffer for my stupid choices. He knew that about me. He just pressed in. Because he cares that we don't continue doing the same stupid things. Could be finances. Could be your house falls apart, or your car falls apart, or you lose a job, or something happens to somebody close to you. I don't know. And I also can't stand here or listen to you talk about your life and say, I have this going on. Is God punishing me? I don't know. You're the only one that knows. You got to have that conversation with him. But it needs to be on your radar as a possibility. It needs to be every once in a while a conversation that you have with God. God, I'm going through all this junk. Am I doing something wrong? It's just time to reevaluate. Is there something you've been asking me to do for an extended period of time and I've been shutting you out? I don't know. It's something to think about. It's not always that. There's plenty of other reasons. There's Satan. There's just trials that God puts us through so that we can be perfected. There's all sorts of reasons why junk happens to us in our life, but this is one of them. And if you never step back to consider, am I following the laws of God? Am I being true to his statutes? Am I being obedient to him? Then you may continue to be disciplined again and again and again and not get it. If you want to evaluate your life, you are sitting there going, well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm doing everything good. I don't know if I'm not doing everything good, whatever. You can pray through it with God if you feel like you've developed a prayer life where you can pray to him and listen and hear from him and those sorts of things. If you're more learned by the Word of God, you could take a very long read through the 10 Commandments. Exodus chapter 20, you could spend the next week, you could spend the next month, you could spend the next 6 months taking a long read through those 10 commandments and asking yourself, am I really following these? Just an idea. We got a new year here. Do not make the same mistakes in 2018 that you made in 2017. If you're thinking, I don't remember making any mistakes in 2017, sit down with a journal. Think about it a little bit. Maybe it's a good idea, even if you're thinking, I know I made some mistakes, but I can't remember what they are. Probably should take a few minutes just to think about it so that you don't get yourself into this situation. There is a point, and I don't know what that point is. Maybe it's immediately. Maybe it's a little while down the road. Maybe God gives you some time to figure it out. Maybe you do it once, and he's like, no, you can't do that. I don't know. There is a moment when God says, you can't do this anymore. You cannot continue like this. This will not be helpful to you. And you're going to be faced with a moment where you're either saying, I want to avoid the punishment of God in my life, or I'm just going to walk right into it. So this is a warning. The Christian life is not just about believing in Jesus and being saved. It's very much about that. You have to start somewhere. It's also very much about you have to follow God. You have to follow his commandments. You have to live by his statutes. And it's not overnight. It's not to say that you'll never fail. It's just to say you don't want to continually fail. You don't want to continually fail knowing what's right. There has to be a point at which you say, I believe it, so I'm going to be different. So I'm going to change. So it's going to cause me not to have to experience the punishment of God before I change. One last thing. Also something those of you who have kids can understand, and I hope it's also another form of warning to you. Say that kid served his judgment sentence and then served his 3-month discipline sentence with his parents, and then 2 months later did the exact same thing. What do you think the punishment would be for him a second time? I don't know, but probably a lot worse than the first time around. If the punishment doesn't work for you initially, there was a chance, a very logical chance, that God could step in the second time and make the punishment more severe. So, if you've already experienced the punishment of God for something, and the temptation comes, maybe I should get back into this, maybe I should start again, maybe I should, life sucks right now, so maybe I should try it again. Punishment's always more severe the second time around. It has to be, because he loves you. Pray with me. God, we may be experiencing a very healthy sense of fear for you, maybe even for the first time. God, I pray that we would not lose that. I often pray and hear God to convict where conviction is necessary, and I will continue to pray that because your word says that when you discipline us, then we know that we're children. And that if you don't discipline us, if you leave us to our sin and our depravity, then we're not children. And that's a scary thing. It's a scary thing for me. I hope it's a scary thing for these people sitting here. God, I pray that the people in this room would be wise enough not to have to experience your discipline. I pray that they'd be convicted enough by the warning on the front end to change and be different. But God, I pray for the people who aren't wise enough, haven't figured that out yet in their life, that you would bring discipline to your children, corrective action, so that we're not the same. Would you sanctify us in the most loving way, God? Thank you that you're not a father who just lets us continue in things that will be detrimental to us. Thank you that you even love us at all. Thanks for your son doing what we could never do. And God, would you give us the boldness to explain this to people, the difference, if the question ever comes, so that the world can understand that you're not an unjust God. You simply act as a judge and as a father very graciously. Father, thanks for all these things in Jesus' name.